you all have come to learn more about what's happening with offshore wind. It's a big opportunity that is facing our community, and it's with lots of challenges ahead for us as well as we venture into this. Um, and I just, want to thank everybody who is here to share with us. We have Scott Adair from the county's Economic Development Office. We have Chris Mikkelsen, who's with the Harbor District. He's a director there. Ciara Emery, who is with RWE and Canopy. And she is their community, their community government, community relations, all that kind of good stuff for RWE, who is one of the leaseholders. And then Erik Peckar, who is with Vineyard, who plays a very similar role to Ciara for Vineyard. So these are our community facing folks. And with that, like I said, what we're going to do is everybody's going to have some time to speak. And then we will have opportunity for Q&A. Like I said, if you have questions, go ahead and put those in the chat. And then I will say one thing. If you have a question that you're not comfortable asking to the larger group, you can private message me that question, and I'm glad to ask it on your behalf. That is just to support the folks who may be a little shy in that. So, or uncomfortable, that type of thing. So just feel free, you can private message me and I'll make sure your question gets asked. With that, we're going to ask Scott Adair from the county to set the table for us and talk about the different projects that are happening within our community that are related to offshore wind. So Scott, take it away.
Thanks, Nancy. And I see that you have hands up already. Are you addressing those throughout, or do you want to just keep those questions till the end?
We've asked people to put questions in chat.
Okay.
So rather than asking them, because that will help us move through the process more concisely. So
okay.
All right.
Perfect.
Terrific.
Well, hello, everybody. My name is Scott Adair. I'm the Director of Economic Development for the County of Humboldt, and also wear the hat of the Executive Director for the Humboldt County Workforce Development Board. And I also fill the role of the General Manager for the Samoa Peninsula Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District. Really excited to be here today and to share with you the insights from my agency about these projects. And when you hear about offshore wind in the community, there really are several projects that are involved in order to make any realization of offshore wind development a reality for Humboldt County's coastline. There is a port project, a large-scale port project, which needs to occur in order to prepare for the assembly activities and deployment activities with regards to or concerning offshore wind. That alone is a massive project. I'm sure Chris is going to talk about that in a little bit more detail. But the Humboldt Bay Harbor District received a sizable grant in excess of $420 million from the Department of Transportation's Multimodal Freight and Highway Projects Grant Program. And the development that they're planning for the port will have far greater impacts to the community in addition to just offshore wind. Having that scale of a port project is going to create plenty of economic opportunity on its own. There's the actual wind project or projects, of which we have two. Of the 5 offshore wind energy lease areas off the coast of California that were awarded through the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management's lease auction in December of 2022, two of those lease areas of the 5 are located approximately 20 miles off the coast of Humboldt County. Those projects are still relatively in their infancy, and even though the lease is signed, are still somewhat in the R&D phase, if you will. And I'm sure that Erik and Ciara will talk a little bit more detail about that. And then there's the transmission work that has to occur in order to supply the power throughout the state that could be created and generated by these offshore wind lease areas. CAISO, which is the California Independent Systems Operator, just approved that this is still relatively fresh news, a transmission plan, the value of which is over $6 billion, which lays out key upgrades for the state's transmission system, including how to connect the grid to offshore wind. And of these three, sort of major projects, the transmission enhancement and infrastructure upgrades, the port enhancement and infrastructure upgrades, and the actual wind development projects themselves, we're expecting these projects to reflect a multi-billion-dollar investment in our community. And over the next 30 years, or the operational period, to create thousands of jobs. And that's direct and indirect jobs in the community. This is being done out of an effort by the federal government and the state to achieve some very lofty renewable energy goals. For the state, the governor's office has set a goal of 100% clean electricity by 2045. And in order to achieve that, we have to build collectively nearly 150,000 megawatts of new clean producing power to reach that clean energy goal. Of the 150,000 megawatts of new clean power that has to be created, the state has established a goal of up to 5,000 megawatts of offshore wind energy by 2030 and 25,000 megawatts by 2045. And just to give you a little bit of context, that's enough power or enough electricity to power up to 25 million homes in California by the mid-century. So throughout this discussion today, you'll be hearing from leaders from these wind projects and from the port project to hear more detail and insights into what these projects entail. And we'll also talk a bit about the impacts and anticipated impacts to the community, including our workforce and our businesses, and what that means for our identity and our culture as we move forward. And Nancy, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks for setting the stage, Scott. And Scott's going to circle back with us toward the end to talk more about what, some of the more tangibles that this means for our community. So let me go ahead and do this. I'm going to spotlight our friend Chris Mikkelsen, who is with I'm going to screw it up, the Humboldt Bay Harbor District, and there's more to it, but he's the director there. And what we've asked Chris to talk about is more about the bigger port development project that is related to offshore wind, but has other aspects to it as well. So Chris, go ahead, and I think you're sharing your screen. Perfect.
Great. Scott and Susan, thank you. Glad to be here with Ciara and Erik and each one of you. It's always a privilege to present. If everybody can see my screen, I'll go into presentation mode. This particular spot or presentation is a tad bit longer, and so I may skip over a couple things just a little quickly to help you, but there's quite a bit of context and background that's really important to understand about what the Harbor District or the Port of Humboldt Bay is proposing in comparison to the offshore wind lease areas themselves. And Scott touched on that briefly. So this is an offshore wind. Let me see, I can minimize everybody over here so you get a better view. This is an offshore wind farm. This is a power plant. There's a little area out in the middle there that's kind of rectangular, which is a substation. Of course, we have the floating units. And this is a little better view of what we're proposing. This is a heavy lift marine terminal, which would essentially support offshore wind. And so just a little bit about our project site. Remember, there was 2 call areas leased or by the federal government, Bureau of Offshore Energy Management, the Humboldt call area and the Morro Bay call area. Here's Humboldt Bay. This is a view of the bay and then the offshore wind lease area. And it's important to know that we have limited jurisdiction. So the area in blue, Humboldt Bay, that's the jurisdiction of the Port of Humboldt Bay, or the Harbor District as we're known. The leased area is about 20 miles offshore. That yellow line is the State Lands Commission jurisdiction area, or the state lands area. And then we get out into federal waters. So the Harbor District has limited authority on the overall project, or an absolute proponent and partner in all of this. This is the project site. This was the site in the 1950s. This was a true soup to nuts lumber site. Started with logs, turned it into finished lumber and other lumber products. Ultimately, the excess, the chips and the sawdust went down, powered a cogeneration plant, and then the remainder was turned into pulp. So full use of the material here. This is the former dock that we're currently under the process of getting our permits to redevelop. And that's what it looks like today. So in the very background there, you can see, of course, the Pacific Ocean, some of the industrial areas in the town of Samoa, the former LP pulp mill, and that's the condition of the dock today. So we were a large shipping area. This is an example of the dock that we're talking about, or the wharf area. At one point in time in the 90s, when the timber industry was booming, we had the area right here that we're speaking on, the Louisiana Pacific Pulp Mill dock, the North Coast Chip Export Dock, which is operated today by Green Diamond, and it's the main export of Humboldt Bay right now, which is wood chips. The former Simpson Pulp Mill, which we know today is the Fairhaven Business Park. Sierra Pacific Industries Dock, which is currently operated for log storage, and then Pacific affiliates for the Schneider Dock. Down in the South Bay, there's Humboldt Bay Forest Products and the former Kramer Dock. So again, this is what we're looking to do. This is a heavy lift marine terminal support site for staging integration, some laydown areas, and possibly manufacturing for wind energy components. It's not developing land that hasn't been developed before. It's an economic redevelopment of an existing site. This is an EPA brownfield site. And it's important to know that we have a $500,000 community-wide assessment grant so we can study these sites and make sure that we clean them up and restore them prior to further development. So why offshore wind? Well, the Biden-Harris administration announced that they'd like to have a goal, a very bold goal of 30 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. So 30 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. So how do we measure them? Well, 1 gigawatt is a unit of electricity, and it has a certain value to it. And 500 wind turbines created the power for 200,000 to 500,000 homes. Or if we look at it a little differently, a single gigawatt can power up to 500,000 homes. And so 30 gigawatts can produce power for 15 million homes. 30 gigawatts is the equivalent of 60 average coal-fired power plants. And of course, we're looking to pull our emissions and our carbon dependency out of our world. So hoping to do this in wind. So to achieve 100% clean electricity in California, looking at the state and federal goals for offshore wind, by 2030, the state of California has said they'd like to do 5 gigawatts of power. And the US is 30 gigawatts of power. Looking ahead to 2045, we have a goal in California of 25 gigawatts and a goal in the US of 110 plus gigawatts power. So how many turbines will be needed in order to reach California's goal? Well, here's a little look about turbines over time. And you can see we've got a gauge of measurement on the left-hand side of the screen, and there's some examples of turbines. And in the 1990s, this was the typical size of floating unit that might be utilized. The max on the left, pardon me, I hit the enter button a little too quick. We don't quite know the size of that. What we do know today is that it could be a point where that might actually self-destruct. It's so large. And so what are we looking at? The largest to date, and I think there has been one smaller since we originally assembled this, or one larger rather, but is about 12 megawatts. And so for our project, we're trying to permit between a 15 megawatt to a 25 megawatt wind turbine. Now, keep in mind, that won't be what goes out in the beginning. When we permit to the largest possibility. And that's part of our process under CEQA and NEPA. But this is, kind of the range that we're going to be in. So what's in one of those? Well, we know that we have all the wind blades and we've got to get them somewhere. We don't currently have a rail system here. That's one of the ways to get it. We could do it over truck and land, but as many of you know, our freeway system in here might not be conducive to that. And experience tells us that doesn't always work. So we're looking to bring products in by water, and they'll be offloaded and put into a staging area, or perhaps what we call a laydown yard. And so this is an assembly of a floater, and these are quite large. Again, I mentioned we may not build the largest floater in the beginning because there are some navigational challenges that we might have to do some widening for in Humboldt Bay, but the little red circle in the bottom right-hand corner is a human being like you and I just standing there next to this thing. So it just gives you a little bit of the scale of this floater. They would be assembled on the wharf. They're 425 feet by 425 feet. So for those of you that are a little familiar with what we're doing, yes, we're going to a ball game. They just barely fit in Oracle Park, and that would be taking some of the stands down. So it just gives you a little gauge on size of these. So as we get these out into the water, how many of these need to be manufactured? Well, what do we need to manufacture? So we have blades. We have the nacelle or the power unit. We have the tower. We have the floater. We have the mooring lines, which hold them to the ocean floor. We have the anchors, which anchor them down. And then, of course, the cables that run between them for the transmission lines. And so as we look at this, how many need to be manufactured? What's the required speed? Well, if the state's goal is 25 gigawatts by 2045, and if each turbine is 15 megawatts, then we would need 1,667 turbines to be produced. And if production started in 2030, then we need 112 turbines to be produced per year, or on average 2.2 turbines per week, every week for 15 straight years. So this is not a small undertaking. And moreover, that's just for the state of California. So in the top left-hand corner, we have a floater. Then we have to the right hand a blade being manufactured, the nacelle or the power unit in the bottom left-hand corner, and then a completed unit being towed out there, and then they get out into the wind offshore. Again, we've showed you that they're linked together. They have mooring lines to hold them to the ocean floor with anchors. There are lines tying them together, which is the transmission. It goes to a substation offshore and then ultimately comes onshore. So what needs to be done in the next 7 years? Well, there's different port types. There's component manufacturing, there's staging and integration, or what we call vertical assembly, and operations and maintenance. So here's an example of some component manufacturing. This is a tower section. Here's a blade section, a nacelle being brought in and offloaded, and just a general overview of what those are, and then a laydown yard in the bottom right-hand corner. This is an opportunity that these could be shipped into a port. I've used the term laydown yard a couple of times. They could be manufactured elsewhere and stored or assembled. There's staging and integration, which is what we're proposing here, where these floaters would come off a wharf. They'd be on a submersible sinking barge. They'd go down into the water, be free floated, and vertical integration would occur where the tower sections would be put on the nacelles and the blades. There's a few photos of what that looks like, and then they're towed out either to wet storage or out into operation in the Pacific Ocean. So port type 2, staging and integration. Then there's the type 3, which is we've built these, we've got them deployed out in the water, but we have to maintain them. So ships will go out and take workers out there to inspect, to onboard and work on these. Helicopters will be utilized, ROV, so remote devices to monitor underneath the water. And which ports can do this? Well, there's a port in San Diego that could probably do some manufacturing. LA, Long Beach particularly is interested in doing a staging integration. And we work through our ports up into the San Francisco area ports. We've got the Port of Humboldt Bay, we've got Crescent City Harbor, and we even have some opportunities up in Oregon. But the component manufacturing can be done in a few of these areas. Staging integration can be done in a couple of these areas. And so operation and maintenance can probably be done in most of the areas, but that's the piece that's going to be most critically located to the actual call areas themselves, or the wind offshore lease areas. So there's the two lease areas, Humboldt Bay and Morro Bay. we've got the Port of Humboldt Bay, we've got the Port of Long Beach, and incidentally, those are the reaches of the two ports. It's pretty similar in length, so we can essentially both service offshore wind to staging and integration ports. We're the only two ports that can do staging and integration. And so this is the tow out from a staging integration after they're assembled. Couldn't get those underneath the Golden Gate Bridge, so we know the San Francisco Bay Area won't be able to support it. We have no aerial restrictions in Humboldt Bay. So again, the two lease areas, we're looking at the Humboldt offshore lease area, the Morro Bay offshore lease area. We have a staging and integration port. We know we can tow down to Morro Bay. We certainly can tow out to Humboldt Bay. But we're also uniquely situated where we can support additional lease areas to the north. Those lease areas are being identified and looked at now. So looking at the Port of Humboldt Bay, here's our project. You can see the bay entrance, the towing channel, which we would go through the existing federal channel in and out with products in, fully assembled products outside. This is the green areas, our actual site, and those little orange areas you see in, or we would have wet storage where we have items of various points of assembly or completed that are waiting for tow out. And this is our wharf. So keep in mind that we said we could do potentially some component manufacturing. So we planned for a certain volume of manufacturing on site. We know we can do floating foundation assembly, which is where we would put the floaters together and then bring them out to the wharf and float them. And there's that finished floater we were talking about before. We would have our sinking basin, which is, again, allows us to take these off the hard, or what we call the wharf, and drop them down into the water. This would be them vertically integrated at the end of the wharf. This is not respective of our project. This is an existing project just for visualization purposes. And then we would tow them out either again to wet storage or out into use. So status report on our project. We have a project labor agreement. Remember, we're using federal funds and some state funds that require a project labor agreement. This in no way is to not use the very talented labor we have here in our community. We want to greatly recognize that, the ability of our local merit shops and their trade agreements. At the same time, this project labor agreement was necessary because of the amount of funding that was created in this project. We're working very diligently with tribal engagement, meet with tribes regularly, and that's going quite well. We're very appreciative of the mentorship that we're receiving from our tribal governments. And we have a community engagement strategy. We're going to be bringing a community engagement resolution to our board for approval here very soon. We have a robust community benefit program, as do the offshore lease area holders. We're just went under contract to 30% design for CEQA and NEPA. So we should be fully permitted at the end of next year. We're working on our green terminal planning. And just to let you know about funding, we started with $65,000. We were able to get another $575,000. The state stepped up and said, hey, you've answered the call. Here's $10 million for matching funds. We were awarded a PIDP grant, which we're working under right now at about $8.6 million. And then a $426 million infra grant, as Scott mentioned, which will be matched for the construction of the original 40 acres of our 168-acre proposed project. So pretty exciting stuff there. Project schedule, we are looking to complete permitting next year, do our mitigation late next year. There's some mitigation necessary to do a project of this size. We could begin construction as soon as 2026 and be ready for operation in 2029. This is a very aggressive calendar, and it's the one thing we get comment on all the time. Remember, the state's goal is 2030. They haven't changed that goal. We're going to leverage that goal and make sure that there might be other things that prevent us from being ready, but we don't want ports to be one of them. We have a YouTube video. If you haven't seen it, check it out. My very capable coworker, Rob Homeland, has done a remarkable job on this. He's really led wind energy for us and continues today. Incidentally, he's in Norway becoming even further educated on wind energy right now. And thank you.
Great. Thanks, Chris. When we were talking yesterday, you mentioned that there may be some other uses for the port, as so the port development is not solely for offshore wind. Can you give us some examples of what this port development will do beyond?
Absolutely. So this is the Humboldt Heavy Lift Multi-Purpose Marine Terminal. It's quite a tongue twister, but keep in mind that There are other goods. We currently have forest products goods. So Humboldt Bay is exporting ships to the Humboldt ship export dock or Green Diamonds dock. We have logs that will probably be leaving Humboldt Bay as an export product next year. There are a lot of fuels on the forest floors that they're looking to get off there. And it's not all of that is timber that's going to go into lumber, but it could be used for the fiber markets. The U.S. Forest Service, along with other agencies, has identified that there's a very healthy fiber market. And so there's an opportunity for us to participate that here in Humboldt Bay. And so those are just some of the uses that we would be looking at for our marine terminal. Remember, this is a Humboldt heavy lift multi-purpose terminal. So if wind energy was to happen maybe 10, 12, 15 years from that, we could have an interim use that's very viable for this particular site. One more thing to mention on that, we have a lot of private parties who have sites that are ready to go, to consider new uses, to go through the permitting and planning processes, to invest in those sites, a lot of capable people that want to go. And it's very important that we recognize the investment that's been in this community prior and the investment that folks are ready to make to really grow our port and the ability here. And so I want to make sure that folks understand this isn't just the Humboldt Bay Harbor District, the Port of Humboldt Bay. This is a collective action with all of these landowners in the Bay to really create something new here. The investment that we're receiving from wind energy companies is really enticing and it's helping us to do that. And so we may be able to service another area. We could be servicing a portion of Morro Bay in the short term before the developers in this area are ready to deploy in the Humboldt area. So a significant amount of opportunity.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chris. There's a question in chat. You don't need to answer it verbally now, but if you choose to, you can respond to it in chat. All right. Next up, we have Ciara, and where are you, Ciara? There you are. I'm trying to spotlight you so everybody can see your fabulous self. So Ciara, as I mentioned, is with RWE, which is one of the leaseholders. For those who don't understand what a leaseholder is, maybe you can give some background, or maybe that's part of your presentation, but just wanted to make sure that people get that piece of it. But Ciara is no stranger to our area. She has lived here and served this region for a number of years. So really excited to have her as part of this. So Ciara, take it away.
Thanks, Nancy, and thanks for hosting us all. And thanks, Chris, for that great rundown of all the work that you're doing in Humboldt Bay. And I will get into what a leaseholder means and what timelines and different kinds of permitting processes mean as well. Just going to share my screen here. I can't see my presentation button. Okay. So again, hey everybody, I'm Ciara Emery. I'm the local government stakeholder engagement manager for the RWE Canopy offshore wind farm. As Nancy said, I have been in the community for quite a while. I am a Cal Poly Humboldt alumni. At the time, it was Humboldt State University. I did my bachelor's there and my master's of social science in environment and community there as well. Rob and I believe share our graduate degree. My graduate degree was in conjunction with Schatz Energy Research Center. They had some early funding to do some socio-political scoping of what offshore wind might mean for Humboldt County. So I completed that master's research. And from there, I went on to Congressman Jared Huffman's office, where I served for him in Humboldt, Del Norte, Trinity, and Sonoma counties for about 5 years. And I've been with RWE for about a year. So who is RWE? We are an international company, an international energy company. We've got about, this number is actually outdated. We've got 2,000 employees in the US now. We have a robust clean energy business in the US that includes onshore wind, battery storage, solar, and offshore wind. We own and operate projects through the life of the project. So we are an owner-operator company. and we have about 1,000 turbines that we are operating internationally at this time. We are one of 2 leaseholders here in California. We are 0561, which we are calling Canopy Offshore Wind as a nod to the redwood ecosystem. This lease area is about 20 to 30 miles offshore from Humboldt Bay. We believe it has the power to generate about 600,000 homes. That is dependent, obviously, on how the farm is built, and I will get into that shortly. First, I want to kind of set the table of how we got where we are. What does it mean to be a leaseholder of this 0561 lease in federal waters, and what's ahead? So the whole offshore wind thing in California was kind of kicked off in 2016. That was when a developer on the Central Coast submitted what's called an unsolicited lease request to the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. So the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management is the federal agency that is in charge of leasing of federal waters for the purposes of energy generation. They, the Bureau, are most known for their oil and gas generation. So they created a renewable energy arm as they started to explore what renewable energy projects in federal waters might look like. And they are the ones who received this unsolicited lease request, which is basically, you know, when a private developer says, hey, we've got some technology, you know, we believe that California might be viable for renewable energy generation in federal waters. You know, what do you think about this, federal government? In response to that, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management created what's called an intergovernmental task force. And again, this is 2016. So they said, why don't we bring together federal, state, and tribal leaders to explore what, you know, Bureau priorities might be in California. Is a market viable in California? Is this a priority that the federal government should have? So they had a couple of intergovernmental task force meetings during this time, and this is where, you know, I think the Humboldt community started to really get involved in the offshore wind conversation. Around 2018, your Redwood Coast Energy Authority did the same thing. They created a consortium of public-private partners, and they submitted their own unsolicited lease request to the federal government in support of a research project off the coast of Humboldt County. The Bureau said, we love this interest, this is great. Why don't we develop what's called wind energy areas and move towards a federal auction to have a competitive process for leasing for the purposes of offshore wind off the coast. So once they decided to do that, they did an environmental assessment for what a lease and survey activity might look like, and they held an auction in December of 2022 for lease sites off the coast. And again, that is how these 2 pieces of federal ocean were designated as Canopy 0561 and our neighbor to the west is 0562, which is Erik here, who will speak right next. So what I have described to you is a federal process by which the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management has worked with state and tribal partners, has submitted federal environmental reviews to have an auction, to work with 5 developers ultimately off the coast of California, as there are 3 leases off the coast of Morro Bay. So all 5 California developers have a leasing relationship with the Bureau. Now, a leasing relationship, in the way that it is written, is we have permission to ask for permission to do survey work. That is what the lease allows us to do. So the first order of business of these companies is determining what is happening offshore and how we might make engineering decisions based off of what is happening in these lease areas. as other folks have alluded to, there's a couple of other processes that are occurring. So what you just heard from the harbor is other state and federal agencies who are considering plans for renewable energy development and are providing ports with the resources that they need to respond to this renewable energy industry. So you have a separate port process that is not a federal lease. It's guided by your normal, state and federal funding and permitting processes. You also have the toll transmission upgrade process. Your Schatz Energy Research Center has contributed to the state's plans for transmission needs associated with renewable energy generation. That is guided by the California Independent System Operator, and they are releasing plans for what that process might be. That's something that I highly encourage you to get involved with your state representatives about, as obviously this whole community is extremely interested and invested in what transmission for this region might look like. In addition, federal government to government consultation with tribal nations is ongoing. Many of you know that the Secretary of Interior was in town and held a roundtable with tribal nations to discuss, what these needs are, what the renewable energy needs are, and what the needs of the community and tribal governments are. And RWE and Vineyard are also doing continuous engagement with tribal governments as we learn more about our processes as well. And so this, I understand that this graph here is really, really busy, but it really kind of highlights, we officially signed our lease in June of 2023. Again, the auction was December of 2022. And we have about a 10-year development timeline where we're going to be doing site investigation. That site investigation is going to inform engineering design and decisions that we make, and construction and operations plans. And then the entire, permitting process means that, we're aiming for construction in the mid-2030s. So I do just want to touch on site investigation. RWE is excited to announce that we are hoping to move forward with our first site investigation this summer. And what that is it's twofold. It's geotechnical and it's geophysical. So first, we're going to take an AUV, which will scan the seafloor. That will take high-level imagery of what's happening in the ocean bed, what's happening just below the seafloor. Are there sites of archaeological interest? Are there big boulders? Are there rocks? What types of materials are we identifying offshore? USGS has done similar surveys in this area, but they're not to the resolution that we need for engineering purposes. So we're excited about the use of the AUV in this collection of this imagery that will help us determine the next phase of survey work, which will be some kind of coring. So we will use the imagery to then take physical samples of select places in the lease area that we can then investigate and again determine what kinds of soil, what kinds of sediment, what kinds of materials are in the seafloor. And that really informs every decision that the engineers need to make. So things like anchors, things like floating technology, things like placement of turbines, how many turbines, and therefore how much energy generation you can create. All of that is determined on this really critical site investigation work. So we hear a lot in the community that there's a lot of questions, there's a lot of concerns, there's a lot of really big pieces of technology. I think Chris showed you a lot of pictures of a lot of big pieces of infrastructure, and I think that there's a perception that things are just going to happen in the ocean tomorrow. We couldn't tell you what the wind farm might look like yet, nor what permits, that we might need in conjunction with what we might need to build. But that's all dependent on the site investigation work. And so we are excited to kind of hear the call of the community of, understanding that a lot of information needs to be obtained, and we're excited to obtain it. So really quickly, this is just me and a delegation of tribal nations in Norway last year. We have a a demonstration project. It's a floating wind turbine in the North Sea off the coast of Norway. And so we have been taking delegations of folks to see that turbine. I know Chris has said that Rob is in Norway. He is not at the same location of our demonstrator, but there are other projects in Norway that are worthwhile as well. So while we're doing this site investigation, we're meeting with the community. We have 2 employees here on the ground. Sorry, 3 employees, including myself. We've got Jody Himango, who's our community engagement organizer. Jody is lovely. If you haven't met her yet, you will. She's doing things like organizing our community sponsorships and other things. And then Andrea Hansen is our tribal relations manager. She's Inuit and Inuvialuit native from the Arctic. She's done a lot of really cool work with energy companies who are working with indigenous communities up north. And so we're excited to have her in Humboldt as well. So we're out in the community and we're really hoping to talk with folks, make sure that you have all our contact information so we can continue to chat. And I am going to pitch it over to Erik, who is my leasing neighbor, and we'll kind of give you the Vineyard perspective.
Great, thank you, Ciara. Give me a second here. Let me share my screen here. Boom. Okay, let me get this presentation. Okay, let me fast forward here. Sorry. Okay. Thank you so much, Ciara. I really appreciate you laying that groundwork. My name is Erik Peckar. I work for a company, Vineyard Offshore. We are neighbors of RWE. We are a separate, distinct developer from RWE. My background for the last since 2006, was living on the island of Martha's Vineyard, and on the East Coast. And I had been working for a nonprofit on Martha's Vineyard. And the nonprofit was called Vineyard Power. We signed a community benefit agreement with the first community benefit agreement in the offshore wind farm industry here in the United States in 2016 with a company called Vineyard Wind. So I have a lot of experience on the community side of things and working with developers from a community perspective and advocating, that benefits be brought, from offshore wind farm development into the local communities. And that experience with the nonprofit on Martha's Vineyard, I worked a lot with fisheries, with tribal nations, and then just got a really great experience of, the permitting development process, not only from the developer standpoint, but also from a community standpoint. So I can very wholeheartedly say that I've been, in a lot of people's shoes in the community, wondering, trying to understand, where all this development and where all this can go and what's the potential and what are the impacts and what are the benefits. And so I just want to give folks a heads up, I'm coming very much from a community lens. And I was hired on by Vineyard Offshore last June, about a year ago now. We were wrapping up on a project that a handful of folks, have been able to come out on the East Coast and take a look at. I'll get more into that in a moment. But been with the company now, and I'm the director of external affairs. And I moved out to the West Coast with my girlfriend and the photo here, Keely, and my dog. We drove out in October, and really appreciate the hospitality that I've received from the folks in Humboldt, and a lot of the made a lot of friends, and really just very excited about continuing conversations, building up relationships, building partnerships in the community. So I think I'm going to give everybody, Ciara, I think, did a really good job of, setting the table in terms of, how we got here, what the process is like. And I thought it would be really helpful to share a bit of my experience in developing a project, in impacts of that project, on the East Coast in particular, in terms of, how businesses can get involved, and, how the community has really stepped up in supporting that project. So before I get there, I'll give just a little brief background about who Vineyard Offshore is. There's kind of a saying in offshore wind that all roads lead to Europe, specifically all roads lead to Denmark. The Danes, have been developing offshore wind for, 35 plus years. So the company I work for, Vineyard Offshore, we're owned by Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners, and it's the world's largest renewable energy investment fund. Currently, Vineyard Offshore, we have 3 federal leases here in the United States. And we just recently acquired the lease in Humboldt County, as Ciara had mentioned. So this is our bit of our portfolio here in the U.S. For offshore wind farm development. I'll say, I mentioned Europe has been looking at developing offshore, or has been physically developing offshore wind here for the last 35 plus years. So offshore wind, on the East Coast, has been in kind of a discussion phase for the last maybe 15 years. And so my experience comes from, this is on the East Coast here, got Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts. So I lived on this little island, Martha's Vineyard. This is, 20 miles by 9 miles here. And Vineyard Wind is the project that I'll talk a little bit more about. This project's under construction right now. The distance between Martha's Vineyard and Vineyard Wind is about 14 miles, and it may be about 35 miles from Cape Cod to this particular project. And we also have a lease area off the coast of New York, and then another lease area here in New England. So there's a handful of developers up and down the East Coast that are looking at developing projects that I'd say are probably, well advanced into their projects, a handful of years ahead of where we are. But we're in the early leasing phases here. The technology is very different on the East Coast because the outer continental shelf does not drop off like it does here in California. So it's just, there's some evolving forces here that are happening in California, but the market in California is strong. The wind resources here is strong. And we acquired a lease that abuts RWE's lease in late 2022. And the distance from shore is again about 20 to 22 miles, and state waters goes from 0 to 3 miles, and then federal waters goes from 3 miles out to a couple hundred miles here. So this is just a little bit of a landscape of some of the lease areas that we have. So focusing more on the Humboldt lease area, we're expecting around 4 gigawatts of capacity. There's a lot of numbers being thrown around here in terms of how much energy or how much electricity is going to be being produced over the goals of California. Again, a lot of folks are talking about 25 gigawatts by 2045. So there's a lot of reasons for that, and electrification, a lot of folks moving to electric vehicles or mini split heat pumps, electric transportation, so the whole impetus is to then, as we're using more and more electricity and bringing more, the need for more electricity comes on, we're making sure that we're greening the grid, and we're producing electricity that comes from green resources, and we have a fabulous resource here off the coast of California. Locally, we set up an office in downtown Eureka. Some folks may have come visited our office at some point in time. It's at the Carson Block building. We have an MOA with Humboldt County. I should say us and RWE both have this MOA with Humboldt County to explore workforce development opportunities, and we're working with Scott really closely on that. And then both companies, both us and RWE, we are supporting Cal Poly Humboldt. They support an education consortium of universities. We've pledged $500,000 over the next 5 years. There was an announcement there, and we're really looking forward to getting going and working with Cal Poly and supporting the needs of the community in terms of bringing more folks, opening doors for workforce development, higher education learning for adult relearners, and more education outreach as well. So this is a overview of the Vineyard Wind project. So I'll focus on this a little bit right now. So this project is 800 megawatts. There's gonna be 62 turbines when it's all said and done. Right now there's 15 turbines. These are 13 megawatt machines. One rotation of the blade can power your house for 2 days. But ultimately 800 megawatts can power 400,000 homes a year. And it's the equivalent of taking 325,000 cars off the road. So that's significant energy production there. It produces around about 6% of the entire state of Massachusetts electricity demand. And then we have, there's going to be 62 turbines in this area here. There's one offshore substation that collects the electricity from strings of turbines. And then there's 2 cables that run from the substation, lands on the beach here, and then interconnects at a substation here in Barnstable, and then is essentially just into that electricity is just fed into the grid in Massachusetts. And there's a handful of cables that you can see here that connect the mainline grid to Mount Martha's Vineyard as well as to Nantucket. And the project itself, the construction of the project. Typically in offshore wind development, you need essentially a construction port, as Chris had alluded to, and then there's an operations and maintenance port. So for our instances in Vineyard Wind, we're using New Bedford as a staging facility for construction. So it's a bit different out here than, or on the East Coast than on the West Coast, because again, I mentioned the depth of water is very different. So then we're using different foundations. So the foundations we're using on the East Coast are fixed bottom monopiles. So it's a single piling that is pile driven into the seabed. Whereas on the West Coast, and Chris showed some pictures of this earlier, they're going to be all floating foundations. So very different. We're talking about, 100 feet of water out here on the East Coast versus, a couple thousand feet of water on the West Coast. So very different technology and how they're actually tethered to the seafloor. So New Bedford is basically, a parking lot where components are manufactured in other ports around the globe or here in the United States. And then they're essentially brought into the port of New Bedford. And then there's vessels that bring those components, and I'll show a photo of that, out to the wind farm where the project is actually constructed. The construction timelines take about 2.5 years. And then once construction's completed, then we go to operations and maintenance. Part of our community benefit agreement on Martha's Vineyard is we wanted to have the operations and maintenance facility located in Vineyard Haven Harbor. This is where we have a year-round working harbor here in Vineyard Haven, again, close to the wind farm. We started a training program on Martha's Vineyard for wind farm technicians. We worked locally with the local community college, and we started a wind farm technician certificate program. And we had probably about 25 individuals take those courses. And when we had General Electric come to town, they're our turbine supplier. These folks were the first in line to get interviews, and ultimately a few folks and bunch of folks actually are now working on the project and getting ready, to gear up and start the operations and maintenance phase. But there was a lot of port infrastructure that was developed on Martha's Vineyard as well, an investment into the harbor. A lot of with renewable energy and with offshore wind, a lot of the focus is on bringing, our ports and harbors, not only on the East Coast, but on the West Coast, up to, essentially a 21st century standard. So that's very exciting for us out here in New England, but also here in California. Also proudly, Vineyard Offshore was the first company to sign a tribal community benefit agreement in Massachusetts. There's 2 federally recognized tribes in Massachusetts. One is the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe here on Cape Cod, and the other one is the Wampanoag tribe of Gayhead-Aquina out here on Martha's Vineyard. So we signed a community benefit agreement with the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe a handful of months ago. That's something we're really proud of as well. So this is a photo that was taken a few weeks ago. This is actually in New Bedford. We had an opportunity. We partnered with Scott Adair and the county, and they were able to bring a handful of folks out to New England to visit the port terminal, as well as take a tour of the offshore wind site, the Vineyard Wind project itself. So this is just a bit of an example of what the New Bedford Harbor looks like. We're standing at the hurricane barrier here, and we're overlooking, you can see these towers here. These towers are on a vessel, on a barge right here. So there's 2 components laid together right here, and then this third component's actually going to be on top of it. So by the time that these 3, this one component plus the second tower component is going to be connected, you're looking at about 360 feet tall. And then we have blades. There's 3 blades on this, and there's blades right here as well. So all these blades are laid down. So we have a handful of blades here. These blades are about 350 feet tall as well. And once we get out to the full build out, the full height of each tower will be from blade tip to the ocean height will be about 800 feet tall. So again, just the overall height from the ocean to the blade tip is 800 feet tall. And then again, these are 13 megawatt machines. So just to give folks a sense of the site here. And again, the construction, just want to reiterate, in California and in Humboldt, the construction of all of the components will be done at the harbor, and then the whole full turbine will be towed out to the wind energy area. and then will be tethered to the seafloor. Again, here on the East Coast, it's a bit different because of the conditions of the seafloor. The assembly is actually done offshore on site. So these are just basically, we're packaging up this barge and then taking components offshore. So this next photo will show that of that barge that we just saw in that previous photo comes out. And again, this photo was taken just a few weeks ago. This is us, you know, about 40, 50 folks from Humboldt came out to take a look at this project and meet a lot of their counterparts on the East Coast and a lot of the partners that we have on the East Coast and in Martha's Vineyard and New England itself. So this here is the transition piece. This is a jack-up vessel where that barge comes out to. There's a heavy lift crane here, and then ultimately they're essentially assembling the tower, those three components. There's a nacelle, and then they assemble the blade. So all of these, it takes about 3 or 4 days to do a full assembly of a turbine right now. And again, we have about 15 up and going. It's actually producing electricity right now. And then as we're able to build more turbines, we're essentially just bringing them along. But the offshore substation is up and going. So it's a really big deal. This is for us, you know, for me, a love of labor, you know, worked on this project for 13 plus years. So I'm no stranger to working on, you know, long-term infrastructure projects and understanding what it takes, you know, from a community's perspective and a developer's perspective to get to this area. So it's to me, it's really exciting. And I think the point when we got to, you know, bringing in, you know, a lot of local folks, friends, neighbors, people I know, you know, getting jobs, you know, businesses being impacted in a positive way. I think that was that was really very rewarding. Just Vineyard Offshore, and I can put this in the chat. Vineyard Wind, we've done some jobs reports. We've done annual reports to get an understanding of, you know, what our commitments were, you know, are we meeting our commitments and how much money we're spending in the communities. And so I can post this in the chat for folks. I know this will be of interest to folks, but this is just I think just a snapshot. Again, there's a lot of interesting kind of facts you can learn from this, but I thought this was really good to know just from a specific both union and non-union employee compensation. And these are employees, direct employees, the amount of dollars that were spent on direct employee hires, all in Massachusetts, and that's what, $52 million. And then in southeastern Massachusetts, which is the New Bedford area, there was specifically $33 million. And then outside of that is, you know, the 13.5. So just want to say that there's a lot of direct benefit coming into southeastern Massachusetts or New Bedford from the direct hiring phase. So there's a lot of these kind of little charts and graphs in the report that, you know, I encourage folks to take a look at and get an understanding of, you know, how the economic impacts and benefits that are going to be potentially coming to Northern California, and, you know, how we as a community and how the chamber and how the county and how we can really help to prepare folks, you know, to get them ready, both on an individual level and both as a business level, to potentially participate in these processes. So some large scale takeaways for folks. Again, we're really here very early in the process here. I mentioned this, I just want to reiterate this too. We're so early in the process here. And we're really just setting up foundations and building up community partnerships and engagement, not only for our project, but also just want to think about, we're building a whole industry out here in California. You know, so again, we're talking about different projects, but really this is about, you know, an industry that's going to last here in Northern California, you know, for generations to come. You know, a lot of folks, you know, thinking about their kids, you know, getting jobs in this industry that'll provide, you know, long-term job security and the ability for folks to live and stay in Northern California and you know, afford a home and, you know, raise a family and do all the things that folks, you know, should want to be able to do up here. I also want to just mention, you know, the offshore wind is going to be a really big piece to be able to fulfill the green energy targets in California. And then also reiterating, these are multiple projects. You know, we have Chris mentioned the port development, Scott mentioned the transmission development, and then we have the offshore wind piece. So ultimately, you know, our offshore wind projects, us as developers, we're going to be leasing the port. You know, we're going to be leasing the port. So Chris's project, they're building this whole port, and then the developers are going to come in and we're going to be leasing the port, and then we're going to be manufacturing and building components, and then we're going to be building our project. And then ultimately, once our project's completed, we need to plug in. We need to plug into a transmission system. And Scott mentioned and Ciara mentioned there's a process going on with the California ISO, to identify, potential areas, for interconnection here on the North Coast. We're hearing folks loud and clearly that, interconnection here is really important, and that also is going to create a lot of jobs too. And finally, we love seafood. This is from the Fortuna Rotary Seafood Boil. Lots of food, lots of good things, but we're really happy to be working with the Rotary clubs and local businesses and just getting our names out and getting to meet folks. So just really appreciate the time, and thank you so much, Nancy, for inviting me to speak, and happy to answer any questions. And I'll put a few things in the chat for folks too.
Great. And there are a number of questions in chat. So if any of you want to go ahead and tackle those, like I said, in real time, otherwise any unanswered questions will be asked during our Q&A session. So as often happens, we're running a little tight on time. So pressure's on Scott to bring us home with what this all means for our local economy in terms of businesses and jobs, and what those opportunities are, and how it's some things that we're working on together to help support that to happen.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. And to that point, we're still figuring out exactly what this does mean for our community, for our businesses, for our workforce, our local labor pool, for the impacts to our jurisdictions, our county, our municipalities, and what all of the potential ramifications will be to our community for these very massive projects that are occurring, either centric to or related to offshore wind, or for offshore wind itself. We as a county organization, our agency, we have commissioned a number of studies and analyses so that we can better understand what the impacts will be to these different key industry sectors and our industry clusters throughout the county. We are working on a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis of the existing workforce to identify what some of the gaps and opportunities are, and to also understand the sequencing around academic training and skills training and deployment to those projects for those workers. We're working with Exodus, which is a consulting firm on these workforce and supply chain studies. That contract was just executed at the beginning of May. We've actually been working to negotiate that contract for many months in the background. And we're pleased that the contract has now been signed by both parties, and we'll be making a press release or issuing a press release for that soon. Exodus worked very closely with the state on its statewide impact analysis, and we'll be doing something very similar for Humboldt County at a micro level and also a macro level, because we know that our county has a regional and economic sphere of influence which extends beyond our borders. And we anticipate that there will also be impacts to workforce and businesses and industry in Delaware County, Mendocino County, other surrounding counties as a result of all of these activities that will be happening in Humboldt County. We have looked at, for example, the subcomponent list for the parts and the pieces that make up the wind turbines as a whole. We're not expecting anytime soon to be manufacturing large-scale components like the blades or the towers or the nacelles. But when you look at the subcomponent list and all of the small components and equipment which goes inside of the tower or connects those pieces together, we've already identified, in working with the Humboldt County Builders Exchange, which is a construction trade alliance in Humboldt County, that there are a number of subcomponents that we believe can either be manufactured already in Humboldt County or can be serviced or installed by Humboldt County businesses. We're continue to support the need for creating subject matter expertise in our community. Our stance on this as a public agency has been, whether you're for or against offshore wind, we still need to do the prudent thing and prepare as if it is happening. And all of the market indicators that we see, the signals from Washington, from California, from the wind developers, tell us that these projects are moving forward. But in order to make decisions critical to supporting the positions of our community and supporting the needs of our community and mitigating any potential impacts of these projects, we need to know what we're talking about. We need to understand the industry as well as the industry understands itself. And so our agency is currently working to put 12 individuals from Humboldt County through a year-long online offshore wind program, a professional certification program, to help develop more offshore wind subject matter expertise in the community. And we'll be looking to do this for another 12 students, another class of students when this first class graduates. We also hosted a trip working with our partners at Vineyard to New Bedford, back east, to bring 50 individuals from Humboldt County representing over 20 agencies to actually see, touch, taste, feel with their own senses what's happening in that community with regards to offshore wind and how the offshore wind development there is impacting workers and residents and community members and how that community is coping. And that gives us an ability to take the insights and lessons learned and bring them back here to Humboldt County so that we can adopt best practices. One of those best practices is the development of a new initiative called WindLink. Humboldt County WindLink is a support mechanism for the business community and for businesses who are looking to engage in offshore wind. This memorandum of understanding, or the memorandum of understanding, which binds the parties together around this initiative, was just ratified by the Board of Supervisors at the beginning of May, at the same time that the Exodus contract was signed. Again, as with the Exodus contract, we're hoping to get a press release out soon, and we're still in our infancy. There's work to do, but once established, the WindLink initiative will be a locally driven process to provide networking, education, access to capital, procurement assistance, supply chain assistance, etc., to our local businesses. And we're already in discussions with Oceanic and other partners around how they can support this WindLink initiative. I will add a little plug that at the end of next month, we have a number of key stakeholders who have some level of involvement in these projects that we've been talking about. They'll be coming to Humboldt County at the end of June for an event that we're hosting called Power CA. The Bureau of Ocean Energy Management has committed to sending personnel. California Energy Commission is sending personnel. We have other involvement from the wind developers, from the Harbor District, and other federal and state agencies are coming. Even though this event is more specific to investing in renewable energy projects around California, it will touch on offshore wind. And if there's any interest in attending that event, you can reach out to me, email me, or reach out to Nancy, and we can get you connected with the right information. The last thing that I'll share is we're still working to understand what the ancillary impacts are going to be to our soft infrastructure, our community infrastructure. And by that, I mean our housing, our medical care industry, our child care industry. We know that in order to attract and sustain the right workforce to service and support these projects, that workforce is also going to need support and service in the form of those services that the community generally provides. And whereas we already have a shortfall and are dealing with some capacity issues as a community and are lacking some resources already with regards to some of the soft infrastructure in Humboldt County, we're looking at what do we need to do to bolster that so that these industries are ready when these projects come to fruition? And what can we do to maintain that level of energy so we continue to have those services in the community for Humboldt County's residents far into the future? And so with that, I'm very thankful for the time to be here today. My time for offshore wind is covered under a grant that we received from the state. If it were not for that grant, the county would not have a revenue stream or source to pay for staff to engage in offshore wind related activities. So I'm thankful to the state for that grant, thankful to our partners on the call today, and thankful to Nancy for hosting this conversation.
Great. And I'm thankful for you, Scott. You're a fantastic partner, and I learn a lot from you every time I talk with you about this and many other subjects, and all of you. So appreciate your time today. So we have about 10 or 12 minutes available for Q&A. I want to, I've asked folks to put questions in, sorry, I'm trying to do two things at once. There we go. Oops, just spotlighted somebody who should not be spotlighted. I'm going to stop trying to do two things at once. We'll get everybody spotlighted here. There are a number of questions that were asked in chat. A lot of them were answered, but I'm going to do my best to go through and find the ones that were not answered or might need a little bit more thorough answer. As I put in chat, what our practice is, if there are questions that don't get asked or don't get answered through this process, we'll make sure that we get answers to you. So like in the form of like a longer Q&A kind of a document. But please don't raise your hand to ask a question. Please put it into chat. With that, I'm going to try to do what there we go. I'm getting it here. There we are. There's our 4 speakers. And I am going to zip up to the top and see if there are things that were asked earlier on that haven't been responded to.
I'm not sure that Brian Centeni was one of your speakers.
You know what? I'm sorry, Brian. I did that to you twice.
Nancy, there was a question from Robin Jenkins about Vineyard and RWE being regional power vendors, and maybe I can clarify that. That
sounds great.
A little bit of a weed. So this goes into so Vineyard, Offshore, and RWE. We're developers, and we are going to be just essentially selling our electricity into the market. And how that works is then you have in Northern California, it's a little bit confusing, not to get too in the weeds here, but you guys have the RCEA, the Redwood Coast Energy Authority. They are your community choice aggregator, and what they do is they essentially procure contracts, contracts on behalf of the ratepayers. So there's that one aspect. So RCEA is your default provider, and then they handle the generation portion of that. And then there's also, PG&E and the other utility companies, and we're ultimately going to be providing or selling electricity into the grid that the utility companies will essentially be purchasing from us. And then that gets into wholesale power rates, retail power rates, but it's not like you're going to be able to choose, Vineyard Wind or Vineyard Offshore or RWE as your supplier. I hope that answers your question.
Great, thanks. I am going to go up to a question, and Greg, and I don't know if this was answered. You can just give me a thumbs up or thumbs down if this was fully answered to your satisfaction. It says, I assume that this project is not dependent, and I think this was during the port conversation, that this project is not dependent on the projects in the Humboldt Call area. Is that correct? Any projects on the number of types of jobs once the project is completed and operating? ? So I think that was to Chris. And Greg, I know you want to, I see you've unmuted, but I'm going to ask if did you feel like that question was answered to your satisfaction, or do we want Chris to respond to that?
Partially, yeah. Obviously, this is a multi-use facility that's going to benefit a lot of different projects and companies. The jobs question wasn't answered, but I don't know that they know that for sure. Just a point.
Yeah, that is, the jobs question is a big old question mark. I know Scott's office is doing a lot of work to figure that out. So there's another question that was sent to me directly, and it was about the PLA, and I assume that's with the port, but of course there will be PLAs, project labor agreements, with other players in this, because with federal funding, it's PLAs are required. There's concern that that may limit the ability of non-union shops to participate. And there's a question about community benefits agreements, and as being one solution to supporting non-union shops' engagement in offshore wind. Can you talk a little bit about how CBAs can help engage the non-union shops in offshore wind projects?
I can take a stab at the CBA portion of that. I can't speak to the Harbor PLA. So community benefits agreements. One of the things when I was working with Congressman Huffman, one of the things that he and the community were fighting for in the federal leasing process were getting the federal government to understand that local communities need to benefit. And this is a little complicated, but the Bureau essentially does not have grant-making authority. So this entity of the federal government, which accepts lease payments, has no ability to put that money themselves back into community. So the workaround to them not being able to do this, that their mandate is to put money into the federal treasury. The workaround was, creating a system of bidding credits by which developers in their lease are required to deploy funds into communities. So we receive a discount at auction with the federal requirement that discount that we received needs to go into 3 buckets. 20% is for workforce development and supply chain. So that's things like Erik mentioned, the SHATS, the Shots Energy Research Center efforts for the Pacific Offshore Wind Consortium. That's a workforce development effort that might potentially be a bidding credit opportunity. There are things like, CR workforce training programs. There are things, in the workforce and supply chain space, maybe we figure out a piece of the supply chain and the two companies together can provide funds to make things happen in that way. So there's 20% from both companies for those efforts. Then there's 5% for what's called lease area users. That's going to be primarily your fishing and your maritime industries. And then there's 5% for general community benefit agreements. So that 5%, might be Samoa residents saying, this kind of development is going to make more potholes in the road. Maybe you need a pothole fund or something like that. I'm just making stuff up here, but so there's three pots of money that again is a federal process. Both RWE and Vineyard have applied and are participating in that bidding credit opportunity. That is kind of a longer term effort, that those funds have to be certified by BOEM during the final design review. So we're still many years out from really understanding what the best opportunities for those funds are. And part of that is working with partners like Scott and the county and understanding, what are the community needs and what are the best ways to deploy some of these funds. So happy to chat about that piece of it, anytime.
Thanks, Ciara. Another question that came up. You had something you want to say, Erik? And I just we have about 3 minutes left.
No worries. I'll just want to add to that too. Again, I put in the chat, a link to Vineyard Wind's jobs report. And there's I want to reiterate, there's some really good numbers that kind of outline, union jobs, non-union jobs. And I think folks, when they go through that report, understand, again, California is a different animal. We don't have a PLA yet. Things are, It's going to be a different beast out here. But just to give folks an understanding of like, there's a lot of non-union labor jobs opportunities, and there's a lot of union labor job opportunities. So it's not like just because you sign a PLA, as we had to do in Massachusetts, it wasn't just like everything went to union labor. So I just want to just reiterate that there's a lot of opportunities for a lot of different individuals, but also just, you know, setting expectations too, that there will have to be, there likely will be, there will have to be in PLA, as you mentioned earlier, Nancy. Pardon me.
Okay. Thanks, Eric. So there's a few more questions, but I want to close up with a really big one that Jennifer Budwig posed. And so if you could give just like really like lightning answers, you know, 20, 30 seconds each. What are the biggest potential obstacles to moving this project to completion? And we'll talk about offshore wind specifically, because knowing that the port has its own set of challenges, but let's talk about offshore wind. And maybe Erik and Ciara, you can take the lead on answering that.
Yeah, I can start. I think overall it's the big thing that I see now is I think just I think support, you know, understanding that these projects take everybody, you know, to get behind. And you know, that's from, you know, from our elected officials, from, you know, the folks that, you know, take our trash away. And I think it's just an understanding that there's going to be points in times where, you know, again, there's benefits coming in the community. We talk about community benefit agreements, but also the way that we see these types of developments is these are really true partnerships between us and the community. You know, there's a lot of needs that the community has in terms of, you know, meeting their renewable energy targets, jobs, things like that. And we can make all that happen, but it's also at the end of the day, these projects need a lot of support and we need a lot of lifting, and it takes a lot of work. So there's going to be, you know, along the way, it's like you all folks in the community are going to ask things of us. We're equally going to ask things of folks in the community as well. You know, hey, look, maybe write some letters, or hey, maybe we need some support here, or hey, look, because we're also competing from other resources in the state, you know, in terms of, you know, how much electricity is going to be procured, or if there's going to be transmission here. You know, we are definitely going to be competing with, you know, land-based wind farms, solar, offshore wind, even in the Central Coast. So if we want to make all this reality, it's, you know, there's going to be, you know, a lot more conversations that need to happen.
Great.
And I'll just say, and this is kind of related to a couple of questions that Greg has in the chat too. I think Greg said, what's your go, no go? And now I see he's saying, you know, if and when. So I'll just kind of cover all this very succinctly, Nancy. There's a couple of things, right? So we are in this site investigation stage, but while we are in this site investigation stage, we are working really closely with the state of California. The developers worked really hard together last year to get AB 1373 passed, which was the mechanism by which power can be purchased from these projects. So that was big hurdle and win number one. That bill is passed, it's being implemented. And so, you know, again, working with your state legislators, understanding that process, we're working really closely with the state on that process. Number two is port development. We have no agreements with the Port of Humboldt Bay at this time. That is a totally separate project and a separate permitting process. But we are hoping that we can utilize Humboldt Bay, and a lot of benefit of this community will come out of the utilization of Humboldt Bay for this purpose. So understanding the port's situation is critical. And then transmission. I know I don't need to talk to this county about how transmission issues affect everybody, but also, you know, understanding the CAISO process, the transmission upgrade, getting the power connected to this community, having a benefit here, and then providing power to the rest of the grid, again, through this state's PPA process is critical. So to Greg, your question too, and Will, it's AB 1373, and Erik put it in the chat, but to Greg's question too, those are the three big things that need to align. So Erik and I and our companies are we're strategizing on how to make all these things align so that we can build the projects and deploy the wind turbines and plug them into the system, as Erik said. So it's not the feasibility stage that's the go, no go. It's these three really key development and policy priorities that need to align in order to make these projects happen, in addition to the work that we need to do in this community and with you all.
All set.
All right, so we are just about 2 minutes over. There are still some a few questions that I will go ahead and assemble and send out to the presenters just to get, so we are fully answering any questions that you have. This is a really geeky topic, and I feel like we are getting past the, here's the easy picture of it all and getting into a lot more of the nuts and bolts and nitty gritty. So appreciate you all making this as accessible as possible. So there's a lot of complicated issues, and we really appreciate your availability. I know it was easy to get to you. It's just like ask and you showed up. So really appreciate all four of you, Chris, Scott, Erik, and Ciara, and then appreciate everybody who showed up to hear what's going on. We have a lot more education and a lot more updates that, we as the chamber remain very committed to being part of the education piece of this and also helping to support local business engagement in this. We're vital partners in the WindLink program as well that Scott talked about. So with that, thank you all again. We will be sharing the recording of this. We'll also send a copy of the chat so you can have any links and answers to the questions that were asked. All right, with that, we will go ahead and wrap up. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and we will stay tuned to see what's next with offshore wind and port development.